Welcome back to day 58 of the podcast, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into some fascinating events from the Book of Numbers, particularly focusing on the rituals of the Israelites and their journey through the wilderness. From the ceremonial cleansing of the Levites to the movements of the cloud and the roll of trumpets, there's a lot to unpack here.
That's right. It's such an interesting and rich passage. The Levites, their specific duties, and the way their roles were structured in relation to the Israelites, it's like this deeply spiritual system that really had an organized, almost military precision. But before we get too deep, let's start with something foundational, the lighting of the lamps in the tabernacle.
Oh, absolutely. We see in Numbers chapter 8 that Aaron is instructed to light the 7 lamps in the tabernacle, specifically to give light in front of the lampstand. There's something really beautiful about the imagery there. The light symbolizing the presence of God, guiding and illuminating the path.
And it's not just any light. The lampstand itself is described as a beaten work of gold, from base to flower. It's meticulously crafted, showing that even the smallest details were important when it came to honoring God. It's a reminder that every act of service to God, no matter how small, was done with great care and reverence.
Exactly. And we also see that the Levites were set apart for a special role, essentially standing in place of the firstborn Israelites. This idea of substitution is key throughout the narrative. The firstborn were originally consecrated to God, but the Levites were chosen to serve in their stead. That's a huge responsibility.
It is. And then there's the ritual involved in their consecration. The Levites had to undergo a cleansing process. They shaved their whole bodies, washed their clothes, and made offerings. It's such a detailed and ritualistic process. Why do you think there was such an emphasis on purification?
Purification was essential to show that they were ready to serve God, right? It's almost like setting them apart from the common, the profane, so that they could engage in holy duties. It wasn't just physical cleansing. It symbolized spiritual renewal, making them fit for the sacred tasks ahead. They had to be spiritually pure to enter God's service.
That makes sense. It's all about holiness, the purity of the vessel, so to speak. And speaking of purity, let's talk about the Passover mentioned in chapter 9. It's a significant event that the Israelites must observe at a certain time, but what happens when someone is unclean? It's interesting that there's an allowance for them to still participate in the Passover a month later.
Yes, that's a great point. It shows God's grace. If someone was unclean because of touching a dead body, they were allowed to celebrate Passover the next month. This kind of accommodation is a reminder that God values people's hearts over their ritual status. The essence of the Passover is about remembering God's deliverance, and no one should be excluded from that.
Right? And I think this also emphasizes that the law isn't just about rigid rules, it's also about mercy and inclusiveness. The Israelites were supposed to care for each other, and part of that care was making sure that even if someone couldn't participate on the exact day, they still had a way to fulfill the command.
Absolutely. It's a great example of God's desire for His people to remember and stay connected, regardless of their circumstances. But let's also talk about the cloud and the fire that guided the Israelites. In chapter 9, we see that the cloud would guide the people, and when it moved, they had to move. It's such a tangible representation of God's guidance, don't you think?
For sure. It's almost like the Israelites had this visible, real-time connection to God. I think we often talk about faith being something internal, but here it's so physical. They could see God's presence with them, leading them through the wilderness. That cloud by day and fire by night wasn't just practical for navigation. It was a reminder that God was with them, watching over them at all times.
Exactly. And the detail that the cloud would stay in one place for days or even months really highlights how patient God was with them. If the cloud stayed in place, the Israelites stayed. It wasn't about rushing to the next destination. It was about being in step with God's timing.
That's such an important insight. The idea of waiting for the cloud to move shows trust in God's timing. And it's not just about physical movement, it's also about spiritual movement, moving in alignment with God's will.
Speaking of movement, let's talk about the role of the trumpets in chapter 10. God commands Moses to make 2 silver trumpets, which the priests would blow to call the congregation together or to signal the start of their journeys. It's interesting how something as simple as a trumpet could carry such significant meaning.
It's fascinating. These trumpets weren't just for getting people's attention, they were also used in times of battle to remember God's intervention and to call upon His protection. Every time the trumpet sounded, it wasn't just a logistical tool, it was a spiritual signal, reminding the Israelites that God was with them in their battles, in their feasts, and in their everyday lives.
And that brings us to the structure of the Israelites' journey. The way they were organized into camps with specific standards for each tribe, it was like a well-planned operation. When the cloud moved, the tribes moved in their appointed order. There's a deep sense of organization and divine order here.
Absolutely, and we see how the different tribes, like Judah, Reuben, and Ephraim, had their leaders who would guide the people forward. It's interesting how this mirrors the way leadership works in any organization. Every tribe had its role, and they were all working toward the same goal, to follow God's plan.
Yes, and I think this speaks to the larger picture of God's covenant with Israel. It's not just about the individual, it's about the whole community. Everyone had a role to play, whether they were leading or following, serving or supporting. It's about unity in purpose and action.
That's the beauty of the story, isn't it? It's about finding our place in God's bigger plan and working together to fulfill it. Whether we're lighting lamps, blowing trumpets, or traveling across the wilderness, every action is part of a divine rhythm.
And that rhythm, that sense of divine timing and order, is what ties everything together in this part of the story. From the light of the lamps to the movement of the tribes, to the trumpets and the cloud, everything points to God's presence, His guidance, and His care for His people.
Absolutely. It all comes back to trust, patience, and obedience. The Israelites' journey wasn't just physical, it was deeply spiritual, and that's something we can take away from their story. How do we stay in step with God in our own lives?
It's a question worth reflecting on, isn't it? How do we wait for His guidance, and how do we listen for His signals in our daily lives? Maybe, like the Israelites, we need to be more intentional about following His timing, no matter how long it takes.
Definitely. It's all about being present in the moment and trusting that God knows the path ahead. That's something we can all keep in mind as we navigate our own journeys.
Well, that wraps up our discussion for today. We've explored some really deep themes in Numbers, from the sacred rituals to the trust in God's guidance. As always, we hope this conversation has sparked some thoughts and reflections for you as well.
Thanks for joining us. Take care and see you next time as we continue to explore more meaningful stories from Scripture. God bless.